So one of our nieces with her boys were here for a little while at the house, and we were running some trains. She came down and started asking some questions, and asked a question that I thought was actually a very good one that I had never thought about. Might be an interesting topic to talk about in a video. So what we'll do is we'll basically describe how this engine works with the DCC layout. As you see, the track is not connected to anything, so the train isn't going to move because the power comes from the DCC controller through the rails and then is picked up through your wheels. There's little wipers in here that pick up the electricity, and then inside on the DCC engines and also the DCC ready engines, there's like a motherboard. We call it a motherboard, and we'll be taking this engine apart this weekend to add ditch lights to the front. So I'll be taking shots through the weekend of the different parts. The particular engine is made by Atlas, and it has a 21 pin connector on the motherboard so that you can put an encoder, either a sound or a non-sound encoder. The thing that they do with Atlas lately is if they don't put ditch lights on it, they don't actually solder on some of the components on the motherboard, so it's very hard to add them. Even though the decoder has the capability to have the outputs for it, there's no place to actually hook them up. So if that's the situation you have, there's a company called Nix Trains, which is spelled Nixtrainz, and they have a product called Decoder Buddy, and they have a version 4 and a version 5. So I know that this engine has a version 4 lock sound decoder in it. So I went ahead and purchased this device here, which is a motherboard. And what this will do, and you'll see later in the video, this is almost a direct replacement for where this other motherboard is in this engine. The mounting holes almost perfectly match up, and this is where your decoder goes. So we'll be taking the decoder out of this one and putting it on this board, and it gives us the ability to use all 6 of the outputs on that version 4 lock sound decoder, whereas the motherboard on here only allows us to use the headlight, so we can't add anything else. And these are relatively inexpensive. You can get them usually for under $15. So it's a pretty decent way to upgrade your locomotive. And because the discussion was how does it get its power and what makes it move, that's why I wanted to do this little video, short video. So we'll eventually be getting into the inside of this, and I'll show you all that component inside that actually makes the engine move. There's constant power on the track from the DCC controller, and then signals to do commands to start the engine, move it forward, move it backward, turn lights on and off, all go through the rails and then are interpreted by that decoder. This is a lock sound decoder, and if we take these protective things off, you can see that this would, when you line up the holes, there's one that has that's missing a pin, which is on this end. So this would basically go onto the decoding, onto the motherboard, like so. And that's how they would mate. Now this decoder actually had a violent death. We had a blowout on this capacitor, so this is no good anymore. So we're going to use the one that's in this engine on this board. Okay, the shell we got off. I like these little, like if you buy an HO style car that comes in a little box, these are kind of neat to hang on to because you can put all your little screws and the coupler boxes and all that in there. So here's the shell removed, and we will be installing 2 new ditch lights on the front because this engine actually had ditch lights, even though it didn't come with it from the Atlas. And then because they use 1 unit for the, I don't know if we can see that, but There's one unit for the headlight in the back, and also the number board. It's hard to make those separate, so we won't be doing much with that. So I'm going to stop the tape for a second and zoom in. So this again is the motherboard right here, and there's 2 wires that come from the back truck and 2 wires that come from the front truck, which you can't see in the video very well. There we go. And they go onto the motherboard, and that supplies power to the motherboard from the DCC controller. It also sends the command signals to go forward, backwards, and so forth. So on this part here, this is the actual motherboard right here, and here is the decoder we talked about with the 21 pin connection. Now on Atlas, they use these plugs on the front, and if you'll notice, I think you can see okay, there's only 2 wires coming out of the top, maybe 3 wires coming out of the top. There's extra ports that don't have anything in them. That would be for your front ditch lights. However, there's components on the bottom of this board that aren't soldered on, so you can't get any power to go through these, even though this decoder has the capability to make it work. And that's why we're going to go ahead and replace that motherboard with this motherboard, the Decoder Buddy. And if you look real close, you can see that the bolt holes line up pretty well. And what we'll end up doing is there are soldering pads on the front and the back of this for your speaker and for your track pickup. And then this guy here is for all your lighting and accessories. And that can be soldered separate. And then when it's sitting on there and you go to take the shell off, because a lot of times you have wires going to the lights, you can remove this and take your shell and set it to the side. So it's a pretty cool design. So all our lighting, both the existing front and rear lights and the new ditch lights and any other lights I may put on there, will be soldered to this board here. And again, power supplied from the trucks. This is the guy that regulates the voltage going to the motor down here, and also tells the lights to turn on and off. And if there's any sound, if it's a sound decoder and there's a speaker like here, then you're going to hear sounds like the engine running, the horn blow, the bell ring, all kinds of different things depending on the type of sound decoder you use. So these are a couple engines on the layout ready to go. So there's no track power yet. We're going to put the track power on now, and you can see some of the lights just come right on the decoders, are picking up the voltage from the track. So the furthest one from us, we'll go ahead and start that so you can hear what that sounds like. So we're giving it a command to start the engine. We can tell it to turn the ditch lights on and the headlight, blow the horn, bell, and we can move the engine with the throttle, forward and reverse. So you can hear all the air release, all that good stuff. This one actually has a pretty loud compressor in it. So we can tell it to run the compressor. There it is. There's the compressor. So the neat thing about DCC as opposed to DC is we can control several engines on the same track without having to do blocks or anything like that. So the one that's next closest to us, we'll go ahead and start that one up. Put our headlights on, put our ditch lights on, and then while that one's starting, we'll go ahead and start this SD90 Mac up. you can see, if you have 3 boys down here running each an engine, each blowing the horns and stuff, it can get pretty noisy pretty quick with the sound, but it does have a pretty neat effect. So there's our ditch lights and our headlight on that engine. So there you go. That's a quick overview of what DCC does in putting power to the rails, goes through the wheels and the pickups into the decoder, powering the decoder up. The decoder then gets signals from your DCC controller, your throttle, and turns lights on, turns lights off, tells it to go forward, turn the compressor on, all kinds of neat things with DCC as opposed to the old DC. So I hope that little intro gets you a little bit interested in DCC.